Right. There's a couple things I want to share with you guys by screen that I just need Sarah to make an adjustment upstairs because this computer is not completely set up yet, so she's just doing that. We have agendas here that you guys can pass out, and I'll share it with you on the screen in just a second. I just need Sarah to adjust it. It just won't open.
I have one thing. Oh, sorry, if you want.
Okay.
Somehow, Doug, I never got an email about this, but I ended up with a calendar thing only. Did you guys get an email? Yeah.
Yes, so Sarah
This
sent
is the
an
second
email
one that,
out.
yeah, something must have been wrong with my email yesterday.
I found mine yesterday after the notice came out. I found it in the spam.
I'm gonna look there.
Yeah, it was sent out last Monday.
Yeah.
The original email was sent out last Monday.
Yeah, and we didn't, none of us really knew about it when Doug mentioned it yesterday.
So I actually sent an email to you guys about a week ago, and then including a bunch of attachments. And then Sarah had sent out the invite with the link to this meeting, the information for this meeting. And then I had forwarded it again. So maybe check your spam folders, and maybe we have to have an integrated look at something that's going on, because there were a couple of emails that went out about this.
Yeah, because I didn't have any of them.
Yeah, I didn't see anything either. I'm not saying I didn't get it. I got about 10,000 emails this week, but first I saw it was yesterday, so.
I saw it a week ago, so it came through on this end.
You said you got it, Jared?
I got it, yeah, for what it's worth.
Okay, so thank you all for being, and actually we have the whole town board, and we have Jim, Caitlin, and Chris in the conference room. Thank you guys for doing it from back there. It just helps with social distancing. I know we've got Chris Jensen listening in, Kate, and then everybody here. So just real quick, I just want to kind of start with, I put together, and I want to try to keep this to an hour. We have a finance meeting at 11:30, so I want to try to wrap this up within an hour. I think this is going to be the first of several meetings. I put together an agenda just to kind of help keep us on track here. I'm screen sharing this. Can you guys see this okay on the screen?
Yep.
Okay. Kind of want to go through just a real quick overview of why we're here today. Review the purpose of what we're doing, the establishment of actually a planning team. I'll come back through these in a little bit more detail one by one. Talk about meeting schedule, review the law that's requiring us to be here essentially. Talk about whether we need to be thinking about a policy versus a local law, whether or not we should use the template, authorization, timeline of what we have to do with this, the review the policy, the process, and then we'll adjourn the meeting. Hopefully we can get through all that in an hour. I don't just to kind of start, I don't think we're going to get through everything today. I think this is going to be a series of meetings that we're going to have to work through this collectively together. But that's kind of like a very, very broad overview. So let me jump into some specifics here, and please ask questions at any point in time as we're going through this here today. And I will do my best. I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I have participated in a New York State Association of Towns webinar on this. I've also done research. I've also gone back and forth multiple times with the attorney for the New York State Association of Towns, and also talked to some folks in the state legislature about this. So I've tried to get up to speed as much as I can on this whole situation. If I flip to this, can you guys see that there? Do you see the Assembly and Senate bill number here, the S0867? So you can see that. Okay, all right. So why are we meeting? Basically, we're meeting because the New York State Legislature and the governor said we have to, is the short answer. So the Assembly and Senate passed legislation that basically said that we as a public employer have to adopt a plan for operations in the event of a declared public health emergency, specifically involving a communicable disease, infectious disease policy, basically, which includes the identification of essential personnel, protective equipment, staggering work shifts, and providing necessary technology for telecommuting. There's all kinds of specifics in that, but that's the general overview. This legislation was signed into law by Governor Cuomo on Labor Day, specifically on Labor Day, and he made the announcement that he signed it into law. And it basically goes into effect immediately. It requires that we go through this process, we establish this, and we'll go through some detail. And I know I put it a little bit later on the agenda, but it requires two things. It requires, a big requirement is that we adopt this policy, that the town board adopt this policy in whatever form that we're going to do that. We'll talk about that in a second, by April 1st, 2021. This is a change to the New York State Department of Labor law. So we have to adopt this policy by April 1st, 2021. We are required by the law to, and Chris Litz, thank you very much for being with us here today. Chris Litz, for those of you who don't know, is the president of our Highway Employees Association, also our deputy town supervisor. We are required to provide to any unions that we have in our associated with our municipality a review of the draft by February the 4th of 2021 for review. So it's certainly great to have Chris on board with us as we go through this process and working with us, and hopefully we all kind of are able to work together to come up with a plan that's suitable for everyone as we get through some of the specific details and stuff of that. But we are required to provide that to the union by February 4th, 2021. So that's why essentially we're here. And then what I'd like to do is just take a moment and go through some of the particulars. And I have up here on the screen, I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit for us here in the room. I have the PDF presentation of the presentation that the Association of Towns did. I did email this out to everyone, so you all should have a copy of this. This is a webinar presentation that I went through, but one of the things that they suggest is that we actually establish a planning team to go through. A lot of this involves the operations, the day-to-day operations, as we start getting through some of the detail and everything associated with this. Obviously, we invited the whole town board. If you all five want to participate, that's wonderful. Well, that's not a problem. You're not making a decision in terms of a town board, and we'll advertise these planning meetings and that sort of thing. If you don't all want to participate, that's fine also. Eventually, though, this has got to come to the town board for final action. So anyway, just to be clear on that. I also, just going back here to my outline, and before we get into this particulars, I'd like to talk about the establishment of schedule of meetings. I think that this is going to require a series of meetings, and because of us having that February 4th date and coming up on the holidays, what I'd like to suggest is maybe we meet every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks. And I just kind of want to talk to you about that real quick right here at the beginning. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Is everybody on board with that? We can certainly do Zoom hybrid meeting like we're doing. So if today's a Tuesday, the 27th, and I can have Sarah send something out, but would that work if we meet every 2 weeks? So then like November the 10th, November 24th, December 8th, we'll send out particulars, but just either give me a thumbs up.
Yeah,
Everybody okay with doing something like that? Keep moving. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right.
Same time.
Yeah. Hypothetically, we'll figure that out, but let's just say that we'll send something out, but every 2 weeks at the same time. So this law is, this is a New York State law that was passed, Senate Bill number 8671B and Assembly Bill number 10832. This is the presentation from the Association of Towns, but let me just go through it. Signed into law by Governor Cuomo on Labor Day. We talked about the summary. The intent of this law certainly, I think, has a lot of merit in, and this has recently come up where we've had situations where we've had employees that have been exposed to positive cases. So the intent of the law puts policy into place so that we would actually have a policy that we would follow, that would be acted on by the town board. So we know exactly the steps that we need to take when there's a public health emergency that's declared. We do have flexibility in our policy and in what we actually put into the policy, because ultimately this is a policy that would need to be adopted by the town board. As a home rule municipality, we certainly can put whatever we want into that, but the law requires us to have a plan with some minimal standards in it that we'll kind of start to go through. The state law requires, and this is where we start to get into some of the challenges that we're going to experience with this. While the intent is good, it's also so broad that it impacts so many municipalities in so many different ways. It applies to all state government entities, including authorities, including benefit, and it includes any taxing district. So, for example, it includes we have to have a plan for the Fox Ridge Lighting District. It includes we have to have a plan for the Landage Drainage District. It includes that we have to have a plan for any taxing jurisdiction in the entire state of New York. It's very, very broad, and I've confirmed this with a variety of different sources. Now, we can have a plan, and our plan can pertain to all of our, obviously we have 28 special districts, and we have our general fund and highway fund, right? Including Canandaigua Consolidated Water District, you name it. Our plan can pertain, and we can spell that out, that it pertains to all these districts, but we have to have a plan in place that covers all of this. School districts are also included through this. I can also tell you, I've talked to Kathy, is Brian still interim county administrator? Is that okay? So I've talked to the interim county administrator who emailed me actually even as of yesterday and said they were still waiting for the template. And I forwarded that to him and he said, great, thanks, now we can send this out. The county hasn't even started this yet. No other municipality around us has started yet. And what I was told by the Association of Towns is while there's a bunch of municipalities that are starting to work on this, we may very well be the very first one to actually consider a plan, that we're one of the first ones getting the process started. There is a template we'll get to in a second that has been provided by a firm that's associated with the Association of Towns that actually do the webinar. But we have to, we have to, for all of any taxing entity in the entire state of New York has to, or public authorities has to develop this plan.
How would that interact with like the city of Canandaigua? We use their fire protector, fire department. So
Fantastic question, and I don't have a great answer for you. To be determined, that's one of the things as we go through this process that we have to figure out. Because this also pertains to any entity that we have a contract with. And so to your example, the question came up in the webinar, does this pertain to fire protection districts? The answer was absolutely yes. So that also means that at some point in time, we have to have a conversation with the Cheshire Fire Department because they contract with us, our taxing jurisdiction. So this, that's why I say I understand the intent, and it's as a lot of merit with the intent, but this can also really become very broad, and we have to be careful how we go about this.
do they have to develop a plan also?
So that remains to be seen, but because they are not a taxing authority, they may not have to. The city of Canandaigua would have to. East Bloomfield Fire District would have to because they are a taxing entity. So,
They're public benefit
correct.
corporation, so.
Right. So they very well may have to also. But this, specifically this law pertains to your public authority, municipalities, your taxing jurisdictions. They made the point here, a lot of municipalities, and I know it's something at some point I would love to come back to, about, I think it was 2015, 16, some of you were on the board, some of you weren't. Keith Kutry had started working on a draft emergency response plan. Jim, I know you had worked with Keith a little bit on some of that stuff. That never got adopted by the town board. That's still in draft format. We still have a Word document of that. At some point in time, you know, if we were to talk about a emergency response plan or a continuity of operations plan, you know, I think it would be good for us to go back and revisit that. But that, and they made this point, that type of plan does not meet the requirements associated with this law. This law is specific for a plan relating to health emergencies, pandemic, infectious disease, communicable disease, etc. All right, I've been talking about. Any questions so far? I'll keep going here. All right. So some of the specifics, a list of positions considered essential has to be included in this plan. And they make a very specific point in the actual local law. An essential employee is an employee who is not able to work remotely, who must be responding, reporting to work to perform their job functions. So one of the examples that was used was, for instance, a snowplow driver. Someone who's driving a snowplow is not able to do that from home. We don't have remote control trucks yet. So they are an essential employee who must be spelled out. The positions, not the people, not the individuals. The positions must be defined in this policy. Who are essential employees, who we have to provide provisions for them to safely perform their functions as an employee, an essential employee. And then the other non-essential employees for the purposes of this law would be employees who are able to work remotely, working from home, or others. We have to also, associated with this, as this says, protocols for facilitating and enable remote work, and a description has to be included of staggering work shifts. And I can tell you one of the things that came up as we were having this webinar and the conversation associated with this is, what would a staggered work shift look like? And it may not be something that people are going to be real fond of, but the example was used, your town hall, you may need to have employees work. Some employees work 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and some employees work 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. or 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. Thank you, or 11 p.m. Yeah, for 8 hours. Thank you. I'm struggling with math for a second. Not good when we're getting ready to go into a finance committee meeting. You know, those are the types of serious things that they're talking about in order to give social distancing, in order to make sure that we're taking measures. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, we have kind of done on the fly and ad hoc this year. We've had to make a lot of these decisions, but this would actually formally put a policy in place. And, you know, Kate's working from home right now. Part of the reasons why Kate is working from home is because Sarah's here in the office. Again, staggering those work shifts. That's an example of one of the things that we did kind of on the fly this year, but this policy would actually formalize, you know, what exactly we would be doing in terms of those types of things. Plan requirements. These are all part of the requirements associated that have to be included in the plan. Protocols for the procurement, storage, and distribution of personal protective equipment. One of the things that was spelled out, and the attorney for the Association of Towns had actually really dug into not only the local law, or the state law, I'm sorry, it wasn't a local law, state law, and worked with the governor's office to really try to answer some questions. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is the law requires that we have 1 month's supply on hand of PPE for all essential personnel. In the event of a pandemic, in the event that personal protective equipment becomes hard to get, like it was earlier this year, this law requires that our policy include our protocols for how we're going to have a month's supply of PPE on hand available for our essential employees if they have to report to work and not work remotely. We also have, any questions so far on any of that stuff? Okay, am I putting you guys to sleep yet? I know this is fun stuff. Protocols for employee exposure to the disease in question, employees exhibiting symptoms consistent with said disease. So again, we have to have protocols spelled out in the policy for how we're going to deal with the situation. If an employee is exposed, and leave policies that may or may not need to be updated. I said to you in that text message yesterday that I sent out, we may need to, as we get into this, certainly not something we're going to be able to get to today, but we may need to talk about our sick leave policy. And if that needs to be updated, for instance, I'll give you an example. Our sick leave policy currently allows for employees to, if an employee doesn't have enough sick leave, maybe they're a newer employee, our sick leave policy allows other employees to donate up to 8 hours, or I'm sorry, up to 16 hours.
It's 8, and then it has, if it's more, it has to go to town board approval.
Right. So it does allow for certain employees that have sick leave to donate employees that don't have sick leave to be able to utilize that. We may need to, as we start just kind of talking about realistically how this is going to work, we certainly don't want to run into a situation where an employee maybe doesn't have sick leave, and so they decide that they're going to come to work anyway because they have sick leave and then infect the rest of our employees. So we may need to revisit that policy. We also are going to have to look at, I was just given some information that potentially CARES Act funding may kick in, and the employee may not have to use sick leave at all. So we've got to do more homework as we go through the process.
Doug, we might be required to, for somebody who's a positive, I think we're required 14 days.
Yeah, so that's actually in the template. There's a variety of different things, and we're going to get to that, but you're absolutely right, Jared. So there's, and again, it's whatever the town board decides the policy is going to be, but the template actually recommends that if somebody is exposed to a positive, that they either quarantine for the 14 days, or if they're an essential employee, that there's specific provisions after they have tested that they are able to work in isolation. So we're going to have to get into some of those particulars. I mean, we're really going to have to get into the weeds in some of this, and this is why it's such great to have such a large group, because there's so many different ways that this could be impacting our operations, especially when it comes to some of our essential employees and how things would move forward.
I was just going to say we have to leave, the definition of who's exposed changes daily about, whether you're within 6 feet, not within 6 feet, with a mask, not with a mask, 10 minutes, now they're saying, 5-minute intervals over a whole hour, that equals 15 minutes. So
right.
However we do it, we're going to have a definition that could be, the current CDC definition or state definition, whatever that is, right? So
exactly. The plan also requires that we have protocols for supporting contact tracing efforts, specifically while the employee is working. And again, I think that there's probably going to be some controversy associated with that. Truthfully, I think some of the employees would be concerned about that. But anyway, but it is specific to during work hours and locations for all personnel. This one just kind of shocked me, and I think that we're in a unique situation specifically for our municipality where we can deal with this better than a lot of municipalities. We have to have a protocol in place for identifying emergency housing for an employee, specifically an essential employee, if needed. If we have an essential employee who is exposed or test positive, we have to have the policy has to include the protocols in place for if the employee is not able to effectively quarantine at home or be safe at home, we have to provide the emergency housing and have protocols in place per this local law. Now, I think why I say that, I think we're in a unique position. We have another, we have cabins, we have all kinds of stuff that I think a lot of municipalities don't do. I mean, if it ever got to that point in time, where we have that big of an emergency, I mean, I could conceivably see that we might want to close Onondaga to the public and use that for, our own responses. Hopefully it would never come to that, but you know, we've got a plan for that.
Doug, it says identifying. Does it also mean providing? Because identifying versus providing are two
Yeah.
different things, obviously.
It actually, we got into the conversation during the webinar, and so this says identifying if needed, but it actually details, I guess, in the law, what I was told is that we have to provide if it's otherwise not available. So, yeah, they did use the word provide. This just kind of reiterates some of the stuff we've already talked about. Draft plans must be submitted by Thursday, February 4th, 2021 to any of the unions. The employer must provide written responses. I'm just going to go through this quickly. Finance plans must be published in a conspicuous location in our facilities where employees traditionally are, and on the internet website, for instance. And then nothing can impede, diminish, or impair the public employer, anything associated with a collective bargaining agreement. So we have a agreement with our union. Anything that we put into the policy cannot either contradict the agreement without having essentially gone back and renegotiated the agreement to clean that up. So we'll kind of see, and Chris, I'm kind of relying on you to help me as we kind of go through that too. If there's something that jumps out at you, please speak up or say something as we go through this. So, you know, the question comes up, who is responsible to enforce this? The Department of Labor is responsible to enforce this. How are they going to enforce it? They don't know. This is brand new, and we're all still kind of getting up and started and everything else. And the thing that I would say to you is I've started even reaching out my managers group to some of the other managers, some of the city managers and some of the other towns. Everybody's still trying to, you know, some of the conversations were like, what local law? What law are you talking about? What plan? Whatever. And then some of the conversations are like, yep, it's on our radar. We don't even know how to tackle it yet, but you know, we're getting started too. So everybody's in a similar situation. This is brand new. So I want to jump the presentation. I emailed it out to you. Feel free to go through that, ask any questions. We've been at this about a half hour. Any questions so far from anybody? I want to jump over to the template here. And I want to ask a question too. One of the things I was hoping that we could get narrowed down here today is, oh, it's PDF, should have this PDF. You know what? I was originally going to do this from my desk, and I do not have. There is a template that I emailed out to Sam. Will you ask Sarah to save the Word template as a PDF so I can open it down here, please?
Okay.
The computer down here doesn't have Microsoft Office set up on it yet. One of the joys of the leftover remnants of still fixing our computer system. So I can't open a Word document down here yet, but I did email out to you a template that looks like this. Everybody has copies here. I don't know if you guys can see it. It has some color coding and everything. So this template was provided by specifically the guy who did the presentation at the New York State Association of Towns. He owns a company, Emergency Preparedness Solutions, and obviously he's looking at this as an opportunity for his business, but he was kind enough to provide for everyone a draft template that you could use to help you down this journey as we move through this process.
I've got the template. Do you want me to share my screen?
Sure, that'd be great.
It's not allowing me.
Probably because we're sharing our screens here. Let's see here.
Go up to the top, I think in that green or red area, when you say allow sharing.
Try now, Caitlin. There you go. There you go. One of the questions that I have for everybody is, we have the option of making this a policy, or we could adopt this as a local law so that it goes in town code. I think there's pros and cons of both. I just wanted to get everybody's feedback. I think one of the benefits of it being a policy document, as is as the town experiences and learns new things, it's much easier to amend a policy than it is a local law.
And cheaper.
And a lot cheaper.
Yeah, as the finance team,
Right.
I vote for policy right
Right.
from the start.
And one of the things that we've done, at least in recent years, but I think generally that we've made a habit for quite a period of time, is at the organizational meeting, we kind of like re-adopt, we
relook at our policy.
right, we recertify, these are still our policies and everything. Right, so reaffirm, that was the word I was looking for, thank you. So, I mean, I think that makes sense. A policy is everybody kind of in agreement with that as opposed to local law? Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, if we needed to, I don't think that there's a requirement, and I asked the question specifically to the Association of Towns Attorney. I said is, do we have to do a local law? And they said, really, it was left up to the discretion of the municipality. So I think we can do a policy.
And we put our policies are available online, so
we do.
there's no transparency difference
Right.
between the two, but I opt for the one that's more flexible and cheaper.
Right. During the presentation with the Association of Towns, they refer to the local municipality as adopting a local law a lot. And that's why I went back and I asked that question, do we have to adopt a local law or could it be a policy? They said it could be a policy. If at some point we decided that everybody would feel more comfortable, we could always do something like what we did with the NRI or even some of the other things where we actually put in town code that there is for instance, a health emergency response policy without defining all the particulars of it so that it's a lot easier to change the policy. We also did that with the site design criteria and some other examples where we've done stuff like that. But it sounds to me like the policy is probably the way to go with that. So can you actually, if you guys can you guys all see that policy okay there, your template okay? Because we have a copy here and we can kind of see it here too. So we'll move forward kind of direction of the policy. The other thing I wanted to ask is everybody okay with the concept of instead of starting from scratch, basically using this template at least to kind of get us started? We can certainly make whatever changes that we want, but I just want to make sure everybody's okay with kind of the policy's been provided. It's the same policy, or the template's been provided. And it's generally the same as what a lot of the organizations I would suspect will use. Okay. All right. One of the things I wanted to kind of hopefully talk about today, and Kathy, I'm really glad that you're with us, is, and Kathy and I back at the beginning, and some of this I hope that we can make this policy specific to the town of Canandaigua based on our experiences, things that we've learned this year during this pandemic process. One of the conversations that Kathy and I had early on, I want to say it was in March, was whether or not the town supervisor should declare a state of emergency. Remember that, Kathy? Way back when. And there is state law that does allow the town supervisor that capability. I wanted to throw out the idea, just at least a starting point, without even getting into the details of what the policy spells out for us to do. Taking some lessons on things that we've learned, I want to throw a concept out that what if the policy basically gives the town supervisor, or in his or her absence, the deputy supervisor, the authority to declare a health emergency for a defined period of time. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks. I think one of the things we've learned from the stuff this year with the governor is that people are really upset about how long this has been able to extend on and on and on without state legislative approval. Maybe there's a defined period of time that would allow the town supervisor to declare this health emergency where the policy would kick in, but it automatically would trigger a town board meeting for the town board to make a decision, essentially within a 2-week time period or something or other, where whether or not the policy, all the protocols then move forward. So I just kind of want to throw that concept out first to just have some conversation about that and get some feedback and thoughts.
Is your question on when we would enact this policy, like what would be the appropriate time for, so we're making a new policy, when would be the appropriate time to use it? And you're saying the way we would trigger it would be the town supervisor would have the gun to pull the trigger. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so somebody has to have, there has to be an individual that would say, okay, this policy now
Is in effect.
happens. There's a situation that rises to the level of this, now all these protocols have to start being followed because of this situation. And somebody would have to have that. And state law actually does allow the town supervisor to declare, for instance, the state of emergency for the municipalities. So that's why my thought was actually the town supervisor would also have the authority to basically set the ball in motion that this policy and the protocols associated with this would start to have to follow. And we can always come back and revisit this later, because I think that there's going to be things that we're going to get into as we start even going through the template and start having some conversations about the realistic operations. I think there's some things that would alter our normal course of operations that will be in this policy, that something will have to trigger for this to happen.
There has to be a trigger. I mean, there has to be something that says, yeah, let's put it in play.
Right.
Yeah, that's as good as anything I could think of.
Yeah.
So
you're the supervisor
be-
making that decision, not the town board.
Right,
Well-
that was my question. So you're saying not the supervisor calls an emergency meeting, which we use through Zoom, and we have a town board vote. You're saying just one person would trigger it.
So what I'm saying is one person for a time period, but there may be something that may happen so fast that we need to that same day. We couldn't possibly pull a town board meeting together that same day. That would be very difficult. Where if the town supervisor has that authority, maybe for a time period, maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, whatever, and it automatically triggers a town board meeting for the town board to confirm, essentially, that the plan.
So a defined period of time, like a week, and then that would give us time to post for a emergency town board meeting, and then vote to continue if necessary. I think that makes
So-
perfect sense.
Like the state of emergency that Doug and I spoke about in the beginning, it's for a period of 30 days. And it's provided in state statute. And we discussed the pros and cons. Ontario County, I believe, had declared a state of emergency. It has to be renewed every so often, which is what the governor is acting under, and why it has to be redeclared every 30 days. So technically, I suppose this could even come under that emergency power. And there are very specific times when you can use it. And it's self-limiting, but of course you always have to be careful when you're exercising a power such as that. If we came up with our own, we'd have to be very careful whether it ran afoul of any state laws which would limit the power of an elected official. So we'd have to make sure, check with Chris to make sure that we're not creating powers that we're not allowed to create. But I do think it may come under the general declaration of state of emergency. Certain things can be done if you look at the statute already, and I haven't looked at it since in quite a while because we didn't really need to. Because we don't have our own police department, for example. It's not that I could order our local police department to shut down roads and things like that. So those are some of the emergency powers that derive from that. So I will look into it as well, but always want to be careful that we're not doing something that we're not allowed to do, obviously.
Absolutely. No, and to that point, I think that we're going to need to, obviously, once we get to a point where we're ready to share our draft, in addition to publishing it, we're going to have to send it to a whole variety of different places for feedback to make sure it meets all the laws. So I'm sure the county at some point will, Brian's response to me, Kathy, I don't know if you saw that email or not, was that it's on the radar. At some point, I'm sure the county will be helping municipalities, even if we are one of the first ones, that they'll be reviewing this and providing legal advice and that sort of thing relative to the policy.
So that 30 days is a maximum of 30 days? But it could be less, right? You just can't exceed that. Right?
Kathy, do you know off the top of your head, I know you were researching that back at the beginning of this, the state of emergency, the 30 days for the state of emergency.
I think it's a maximum of 30 days. I don't think it's an automatic 30 days. I don't recall offhand. And then it can be extended beyond that, just as much, pretty much as how the governor is doing right now.
Caitlin, can you stop sharing just so I can pull up the, thank you. And I do not see it, Sam.
Which one was it?
The template, the Word document for the template.
It showed up on your computer.
While you're looking for that, I'll also look up the section of town code about emergency power.
No, it's not there.
The template for the.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry, Caitlin. Can you go ahead and share that? Reshare that with us and then just scroll down. It's not there. Don't worry about it. We'll go through today with this. And can you just scroll down? So the first section here, would just be the cover page of the template. So we'll skip over this. This will just have the date and everything. So this first section is the promulgation section. You should have, obviously, we'll have to insert some specific language in here in terms of, everybody involved with this. We'll put a cover page plus a acknowledgement page, everybody involved. We do need to specifically spell out that we'll have to involve the specific wording associated with our highway association will be included in this, and that they will have reviewed. That's a requirement of the local or of the state law with a town board resolution eventually. The next page, actually, if you can just scroll down, this is just the record of changes. So for instance, future changes that are made once the policy is adopted, so that in the actual policy document that there's a place to note changes and the date of the change. Anything would have to be done by the town board, any changes to this. So, okay. And then the table of contents, again, we'll just update this once the policy. So if you want to go to the next page, so this is where we kind of get into purpose, and then maybe we can get through the purpose section here and just kind of see how far we get here in the next 10 minutes or so as we start to get into some of the details of the actual policy. So the purpose section here, again, it's developed in accordance with the New York State labor law. This kind of spells out. I don't know that unless somebody sees anything that is specifically, we can always go back and wordsmith this later and make this sound like it's more developed by the town of Canandaigua if you want, but at least as a starting point, we can kind of get through some of this stuff. I don't know if there's anything anybody specifically wants to change in the purpose section. Speak up if you do, or you can always email me and we can kind of walk through this. The scope section, obviously, we would be putting in, this is specifically to the town of Canandaigua, as well as all of our special districts. Obviously, we have a administration agreement with all of our special districts. And for instance, all the water districts have a administration policy agreement with Canandaigua Consolidated. So we'll have to.
Would we need to list all of them, or just say if we say it's the town, that's an umbrella?
Yeah, so we'll be able to say it's the town, I think, in just all special districts or any.
Including this,
right. Yeah. The situation overview, this kind of gives the detail here. If you actually read through this, it kind of references the whole COVID. It talks about some of the COVID situation here involving some of the things that we've experienced this year. It actually does say, I don't know if it's in this section or another section, it actually does say that the plan is designed to deal with any communicable disease. It's the result of the COVID situation is why we're doing this, but it's to be used for communicable diseases, infectious control for anything that could come in future years. And it just talks about some of the CDC guidelines this year that have been come out associated with COVID, using hand sanitizer, washing hands, soap, water frequently, restroom use, public outing, touching and disposing of garbage, public computers, blah, 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 blah. A lot of this stuff, again, we've kind of, we'll get into some of the particulars as we start to talk about our operations. A lot of this stuff we've kind of done on the fly, providing hand sanitizer, providing things in different locations. Even, when you guys walked in the town hall today, I saw you guys were signing in and using the hand sanitizer, so a lot of stuff we've done on the fly that have been general best practices as far as we believe, but this policy will actually put a lot of that stuff into place in terms of the process that we'll have to follow.
So I have a question, with this, would we have to like have a higher up state or federal or maybe county say that there's a communicable disease? It could be like just in the Finger Lakes region. Say it ended up being like a flu outbreak or something.
Right.
To where then there's like a hierarchy thing that would trickle down.
Yeah, so, and this is where we're gonna have to have some conversations about this type of stuff. And then I think we're gonna need some guidance from whether it's the Corporation Council for the Association of Towns or some other entity as we go through this, because to your point, that's exactly what I was thinking about with the scenario where maybe the town supervisor has the ability. Siri, I wasn't talking to you. I said the word town supervisor. That was my phone, sorry. So for instance, I know that the law requires that at minimum the plan spell out, like for instance, if the governor declares, or potentially if the county. But to your point, if there's specifically something that happened in the town of Canandaigua, there might need to be a way to trigger the policy to go into effect specifically. So we're gonna have to have conversations about that, but that's exactly the scenario that I was talking about, that I was thinking about when I said the town supervisor had that ability.
I mean, if you look at the statute, which I know I put in the chat a whole bunch of stuff, there's a link and I'll send it to you because I know you won't be able to access this, but it allows for things to be done, epidemic, disease outbreak, and it doesn't say it must be declared by the state. It's just when there's a finding that public safety is imperiled by a disaster or similar public emergency law. So I'll have to get that executive law to see. It's supposed to be something you can do right away. You know, there's poison in the water, or, you know, there are limits on it, obviously, but that's the whole idea, is if we were to have our own health emergency, we could do what we need to do.
Any other questions through the situation overview? We still have a template here, so we're kind of working through. Okay. Planning assumptions. Certainly, I don't want to read this all to you, but there are some bullet points on the next page. The planning assumptions. Obviously, the health and safety of the employees being the utmost importance. Circumstances of public health emergency may directly impact our own operations. And there are, you know, in terms of that, there are details that we'll start getting into about making sure that our operations are able to continue for the greater good for the public. The next bullet point there, impacts of a public health emergency will take time for us to respond with appropriate safety measures put into place and made to operations to maximize safety. You know, just to start thinking about, and this is where I need everybody's help. I think about the things that we experienced this year, and even Jim, you and I think Terry, I don't even know how many phone calls I remember us having. I'm like walking around looking out a window and just thinking, how are we going to do all this? And I was thinking about, like for instance, our water department, when we actually had to, at the height of this, back even in like April, May, and we're having to send, even long before the town hall was open and stuff, and we're having to send employees into people's homes for water issues and those sorts of things. We need to, you know, be thinking about, okay, not only how do we do it this year, but how can we do it better and make it more efficiently, and put that stuff in the policy as we move forward. So a lot to think about.
So when it's talking about the PPE equipment, and it's just not talking about face coverings, it's talking about.
There's a list.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a list.
And we have to have all of that for each
Essential.
essential employee.
Each
For 1
essential.
month.
For on hand. Yeah.
And it has to be resupplied. It has to be a month forward. Correct. If you're a month into it, doesn't mean you only have to have 3 weeks.
So we really need to start out with like 2 months.
You can see how this snowballs. The public and our constituents expect us to maintain a level of mission essential operations, obviously. I think we did fairly good job of that this year. I think we can be more efficient, but especially for all of us for a first year going through something like this. And thankfully, we didn't have the computer hack then that we just had now, because that would have really thrown us for a wrench. But anyway, resource support from other jurisdictions may be limited based upon the level of impact public health is upon them. I know, and we're going to get into some of the specifics, and probably not today. We're not going to get into this level of specifics, but I know, for instance, like Jim has had a conversation, for instance, with City of Canandaigua. What happens if, unfortunately, our highway team is down because of a pandemic and we need somebody to plow the road, or vice versa? We've got to be thinking about those types of things. And I know there's sharing services agreements in place at the county and everything, but we've got to detail this as much as possible. I mean, and we've also, to Kathy's point earlier, we've also got to leave the flexibility for the policy to give enough wiggle room for us to make decisions to keep operations going as much as possible for stuff we don't think about too. So that's always a challenge also. Supply chains, particularly those for PPE, cleaning supplies, may be heavily impacted. We obviously saw that this year. The operations of other entities, including private sector, disruptions in services. What happens if, for instance, and this is where we're going to have to rely on the county for a lot of this stuff, and the county certainly is going to have to go through this exercise also. But what happens if the hospital's down, or what happens if emergency ambulance response services aren't available or something? I mean, that's certainly not something that we're going to be able to tackle associated with this, but maybe we reference, the county as part of our plan or something or whatever like that, even though it's not developed yet. Operational changes may need to be adjusted, like the example, for instance, that I used with staggered work shifts, and then the definitions for essential employees and non-essential employees. So, all right, that's the section through planning assumptions. Any comments or anything on that section? All right, we're coming up on 11 o'clock. Do you want to, I thought maybe one of the things that we could do, this kind of just this basic overview, and that's about all I was expecting to get through today. I was hoping that maybe everybody would be willing to take the template and read through it and kind of think about it and make some notes, and then we could kind of go section by section and maybe start to get into some meat and potatoes the next time we meet. But I at least wanted to start with kind of giving you an overview today and talk about what it is and why we're going to have to do this, and for us to start thinking about things. And I don't know if people have comments, or Kathy, did you have anything?
No, I think following this template is great. I did notice, to Jean's question, I was just reviewing the emergency powers. If a law or ordinance is suspended pursuant to any emergency order, that is only good for 5 days.
The other thing that came up this year that we also, and Jean, you and I have talked about this a lot, we were fortunate this year to have the executive orders that basically allowed us to do basically the Zoom meetings, because technically the Zoom meetings are not in compliance with our remote participation policy. So we need to either.
We should be updating that as a matter of course, now that we know Zoom works.
Right. So we either need, or maybe we need to update the remote participation policy, or maybe it needs to be defined in here that the remote meetings are, once this plan is enacted, that
You could do a
take
cross-reference, have it in one spot and just cross-reference it.
right. But again, if there's a local situation where the declaration of whether it's what's the name of the other thing, Kathy? I'm sorry, it's a state of emergency. It's a declaration of a state of emergency, right? Or a health emergency.
I think that I was even going one step further. I think because of the health emergency, we've learned a bunch of different things about what we can do and how we can do it differently. And we've always just operated in a paradigm of, hey, this is how it works. Now people are able to call in, or on Zoom, they can listen in. And we were always talking about, should we film it? Should we put it on FLTV or whatever? So I just think that should open our minds to some new ways that it will help us be more transparent instead of less, by allowing people to actually listen in, even though they can't be there. people might want to do that. It seems like nobody's really that interested in what the town board does because the town is well run. But it would be great to give people the flexibility to always be able to call into the Zoom. You know what I mean? So I feel like we should look at our policy. That's my part.
Yep, absolutely. Does anybody else have comments either in the room or?
Looks like it'd be a lot of fun.
Oh, it's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be, make sure you drink your coffee before these meetings, you guys. So
Yeah.
everybody stays awake. Jared, yeah, Kathy's got hers, I see. Jared, did you have any thoughts or anything? I think you're muted, Jared.
Yeah, let me unmute. Especially coming from the perspective someday, I'm gonna be back to normal and going into the school and all that stuff. I really like Linda's comments about adding our remote participation policy to this. Somehow to tweak that in there, opening it up for more participation from residents and, people, for myself, I can't make it to all things, but I probably could call in if I had half an hour and be able to sit in on something. I think that's just a great idea. And what is Zoom, like $14 a month versus $1,000 for the Finger Lakes TV?
Right.
It's, it's a win-win, I think.
Well, even Jared, if you're going into the school and you're being exposed to a lot of people and you decide, I think I should be calling in remotely so that in case I wasn't infected, I wouldn't be breathing in here. That, to me, just to have that flexibility is important.
Definitely. I think at least it's going to be our new normal for the next year. That's kind of my guess as far as doing things like this, depending on how the winter goes.
Chris, can I put you on the spot for a second, representing our union here and everything? Do you have thoughts? I mean, I know it's tough because, of course, and I talk to some of the guys sometimes too, and sometimes they feel like, wow, this is a lot of hogwash, and I've had more than one of them say that to me, and one of them said, I don't know why we're wearing masks, this is a waste of time, and blah, 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 blah. But I mean, how do you think that overall, could you give some maybe insight how you think the guys might react in terms of the things that you deal with associated with the union?
As far as, all of this, it's become, I think it would actually help a lot of people because there is something in plan. There is something in writing that says this is the way we should go. This is what we expect if something happens. We know what we're going to do. We also know that it's not written in stone either because every situation is different. We have a lot of guys that don't like change, and it's tough. Through March, and April, and May, it was just that a lot of people, we didn't know what we were doing. We've gotten so used to what we do every day, and it was changed. And it was changed for everybody. I think this will help a lot because it's something that you can put in front of them. They can read, they can go, okay, so that's what we're supposed to do. So I think it's a really good idea. I think I've read the template three times now. Everything that they have in there seems, we should have it. It should be there. As far as the guys, they're not going to like it. Nobody's going to like it. I don't know anybody that likes this. Everybody wants it over. But it's going to happen. We have to get used to this. It's going to become the new norm.
Thanks, Chris. Jim, how about you? Any thoughts or anything?
It would not to say the same thing that Chris did, but going forward, once we have this done, it'll be helpful for all of us to just go to this policy and know what we have to do for the future. So
Jim and I have spent a lot of time this year, and a lot of times we had Terry on the phone with us as the chair of the Planning Public Works Committee, and we had to kind of like improvise a lot of times on the fly and everything. And so, even in terms of, you think about the things that we did back at the beginning with the guys in the transfer station versus even the difference of bringing guys back and staggering work shifts. I mean, we did a lot of different things this year, just trying to keep everybody as safe as possible, but also truthfully doing it on the fly. We were all kind of learning at the same time. So, I mean, Chris and Jim, please pass along our appreciation to all the guys for all of their patience. And I know it's certainly been a very different year than normal. And you're right, having something actually in writing, hopefully it'll give us some guidance for if something were to happen again in the future.
I agree. I totally agree. Because like you said, this year we're flying by the seat of our pants and kind of guessing. And I think having something as a guide to guide us through if another situation happens, I think.
At the very least, it gives us
Helpful
a
for
starting point.
I'm sorry, say it again, Chris.
At the very least, it gives us a starting point.
Right.
everyone.
Right.
Totally agree.
Well, we are fortunate. I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but having lived through what we've lived through so far, to be able to take those experiences and help, codify it in a sense here, use that experience along with brainstorming this group, looking at all the what ifs and everything, should be able to put together a policy that is really going to be more effective because of what we have learned so far. So.
Okay.
There's a lot of knowledge in every one of these cameras.
That's true.
Yeah, I was just thinking of how we were all sort of felt like we were run over by a truck in the beginning, and the knowledge that we've gained, hopefully it won't happen again while we're here. So, we can share that knowledge for the next, poor person, that poor town board and highway workers and everyone else that goes through this. So yeah, I think it's important too, Jean, so that, like I said, hopefully we don't use it, but we impart that knowledge. So they don't have that feeling we had, though they probably will, but.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time. Just everybody, I think, knows, but again, like we touched on this earlier, in terms of the approval process, we'll have to put a draft. We'll need to do a public hearing. We actually technically don't have to do a public hearing, but our normal procedures is we would do a public hearing to get public input and then have this at a town board meeting for adoption. So that's the direction that I would anticipate that we would go through the approval process. But thank you, everyone, for. Oh, yes.
We have the town board, we have the town finance meeting in a half hour.
Yes.
In this room?
Yes, we can do it in this room. That's fine because we have the Zoom set up here.
Do the majority of the town board, town board members, do you plan on participating in these meetings? I just need to know because I have to do a press release if you are, if there's 2 or more.
We'll just advertise them.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
we'll just
the whole
advertise.
schedule out there.
To the extent I can, yes.
Okay.
I think Tuesdays are generally, I don't think I usually have anything else.
And we are recording this, so we can post this, we can share this and everything, and, make it a public meeting, just like any of our other committee meetings and stuff. So anyway, all right, any other questions before we wrap up?
So our homework is to review this and come back with any questions.
And then we'll start going through kind of one section at a time at the next meeting on November the 10th. We'll start with the next section being concept of operations, and then start to go through. But please feel free to, if you want to email, feel free to email or just come to the meeting with them, and then we'll start to work through updating a draft as we get a little bit further along in the process, and we can communicate back and forth with some updated drafts and everything. All right.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your time and everything, and agreeing to go through this process with us. I think it will come out with a much better product with having all the different perspectives and everything that we've experienced this year, so that hopefully we come up with a much better product than we would have otherwise. So, all right, thank you, everyone. See you for finance for those. Some of
See
you
you guys in half an hour.
See ya.